All right, we'll give everybody just a couple of seconds to pile in here. And I'm excited about today's topic. We've got Dean, and Dean's going to be joining us here in a minute. But before we get started, I wanted to do a quick introduction and a thank you to the RejectionCon team for having us here. Hi, my name's John Harden. I am the Director of Product over here at Auvic. I help lead our new line of business, Auvic SaaS Management. A lot of people come up to me at the conferences and the road shows and they go, Auvic, I know you. And I say, well, I may not know you, a little bit newer to the company, but, you know, Auvic has changed a lot over the last handful of years. And we've gone from being a purely network management company to now a multi-product. We've got Wi-Fi management, we've got network management, and now we've got what I represent, SaaS management. And Dean's right, we always do have the best Legos. I've got a whole mountain of them back here in this clutter. I just got back from a Toronto trip not too long ago. So I'm here really on behalf of the Auvic company to talk just very briefly about our SaaS management product. Auvic SaaS Management was built and designed for the MSP community, from the MSP community. It's been about 13 years. So this talk track that Dean's about to give is actually very special to me, but spent about 13 years in the MSP community prior to leaving and joining Auvic to run Auvic SaaS Management. And so we're designed for MSPs to tackle that next level of visibility. As we talk about a culture of real-time ticket tracking, we all know the pains of getting a ticket inbound on an application or a piece of technology that our customers are using that we don't know about. Auvic SaaS Management was designed to bring into light the shadow IT inside of client environments, automate the documentation of SaaS, and open up a whole new strategic lens around discussing shadow IT in your customer environment. And so should you want to know a little bit about what we're up to over here at Auvic, just feel free to reach out at saas@auvic.com. But I don't want to take us too long. We got Dean behind the scenes. He's in the wing right now, and I know he's excited to talk, and I'm excited to have him here. Let's bring Dean on. I'll do a quick introduction. So Dean and I got to know each other through a little bit of the OIT VoIP family, a little bit of behind the scenes on a tech bar. Dean, an additional data point here that's new to me, best shirt in the audience, best shirt in the entire crowd. You know, Dean, like myself, has about a decade plus of experience in the IT, and he's not, see, I keep asking Wes, I want one of those. I've missed that track. I was talking at the same time at IT Nation. But Dean is a decade plus of experience in the IT managed service provider space, mainly with a focus on management and operations. He took a $700,000 managed service provider and took it into a $12 million managed service provider that was leveraged through acquisition into a $50 million plus managed service provider. So we've got Dean with a lot of perspective here. I'm excited. He's focused the majority of his career on operational efficiency, making sure you can hire anyone to fill the team rather than only hiring the ringers. We all know superhero syndrome's not scalable. So I'm sure Dean's going to start to talk about that. So in general, we're going to have Q&A at the tail here after Dean's talk, and I'll be back. But if it's COGS related is what he said. If it's related to COGS, he's going to keep you accountable. So ask some questions. These are his specialties. He's going to have an amazing track here. Thanks for having me jump on, and Dean, I'm excited to hear. And Dean, you might be muted unless I can't hear you.
Working for Ray that long, I'm muted.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Seriously, am I muted? Put it in a link there. Okay. All right. So today we are going to be talking about real-time accountability. We're going to be doing that around the idea of real-time time entry, which is a challenge that many MSPs struggle with. But I want to be clear, this talk is not only about time entry. This is about how to hold your team accountable and make that a part of your company culture. And as you can see, this talk is sponsored by Auvic against their will. So just a quick note about me. John already did a really good job introducing me. Thanks, John. But I'm a service and operations manager. I have never owned a business. I'm very proud of that in a weird way because I think it gives me a certain amount of clarity. I don't get caught in that visionary mindset. I've got about 10 years of knowing all of you. Some of you may know me from Reddit. Some of you may know me on Discord. Some of you may just know me because I went up to you at a show and said, hey, your ideas are dumb. But that's how most of you have probably gotten to know me. I've run small, medium, and large MSPs. I am ConnectWise Managed Certified. In fact, this talk was originally designed for a ConnectWise audience. And I think I'm really funny. I'm also a psycho dog dad. It bears mentioning since I'm wearing the shirt. This is my dog, Lily. You'll see her during the slide deck. All right. So why listen to me? Why enter time? Why do we even care? All right. Time and time entry is ultimately that core wellspring from which all our other KPIs and profit can be calculated. We all run service-based businesses, and our products ultimately are fairly intangible. So recording accurate time entry is really one of the only products we can track in a COGS mindset. It's literally your inventory. You would not want to work for a company that just threw away inventory. Why enter and establish a culture at all of entering data? It makes employment at your organization more pleasant. We'll touch on that a little bit, but I've never met another person that does not prefer having clear set expectations and knowing what good looks like. Having clear set expectations will take an employee who might be stressed, unhappy, non-productive, and will always make them happier about their job, even if you change no other factors. And then most importantly, to any of the owners and managers in this group, a lot of the talk tracks we've seen at this show already, at RejectionCon and other shows, are around exiting, valuation. Accurate data allows better business decision-making. It's okay to say I track everything yearly and make long-term planning that way, but you really can't make shorter-term strategic decision-making, and you can't make tactical decision-making if you don't have real-time information. So entering time and establishing that as part of your culture allows you to do all of these things. So I wanted to a brief slide here just to quickly clarify a few things. The initial audience for the slide deck had been at an IT Nation event. So everything was ConnectWise focused. And it was really targeted more towards your managers and ownership. And it occurred to me that RejectionCon, we have a different audience. And so there's a few topics I wanted to touch on that might not be assumed knowledge for everybody in the talk. If you already know this stuff, you can snooze through this slide. So most of us work at for-profit businesses. We are not working for nonprofit businesses, and we are not working at businesses whose job it is to collect revenue. The goal of our MSPs is to derive a profit, hopefully a healthy profit. So as a result, everything else that we do, any goals, mission, vision, awesome vertical you support, maybe you're the MSP that supports unwed teenage puppies, whatever amazing thing you do, all of that ultimately is in service to being a for-profit business. And we need to be in that mindset when we're going through this slide deck. So a technical employee, so if you're watching this right now and you're a technician, you work tickets, you fix printers, the way you contribute to this ultimately is by making good decisions that are in the best interest of your client base and your company, and accurately and timely entering the data that your company's asking you to do. Doing that is how you contribute to that profit. If you're a service manager or operations manager or other sort of middle or upper middle management, then really you really should be focusing on the P&L of the business unit you're in charge of. If you run the project department, the P&L of the PS unit is your focus. If you run the managed services department, probably the MS and TS components are your focus. If you're a smaller shop, it might be all three, but that's how this slide deck really applies to you. And it's important to understand that means that service management, and a lot of this talk is going to be focused at those service management individuals. Service management is as much about profit management as it is about fixing printers, technical escalations, and whispering kind words to struggling packets as they ease their way through edge appliance. And I think that's important because there's a common trend in our space of service managers are promoted from our technical staff, and they continue that journey of trying to be a technical service manager where they are the highest technical escalation point. That's wonderful. I'm not telling any of you you're bad people for doing that, but in a for-profit service delivery business, that's not really your job anymore. And it's important to have that clarity as we're having this conversation about real-time time entry. And just for anybody who might not already know, it is generally considered to be best-in-class territory to be somewhere around 50 to 60% gross margin on your managed services revenue, specifically the managed services component, not all the crap that might be funneling in there. And for anyone who doesn't know, GM is gross margin, which is the COGS component largely. So that's your cost of goods sold, subtracted from net sales. So hopefully that helps anybody who isn't already familiar with that as we go through the talk. So there's three types of technical inventory that we're capturing through time entry. We're capturing managed services, technical services, and professional services. You can break some of these out a little bit more into subcategories. If, for example, you have an entire business unit that's just doing Azure turnups, and maybe you want to separate that out as some sort of cloud services, you can do that. But ultimately, there's really the three main areas. So managed services, that's going to be your time entered against some form of recurring all-you-can-eat agreement. Generally speaking, this is considered to be the best avenue for valuing the average MSP. So there's typically a push in all of the avenues that we likely hang out in and all the chat groups and conferences to direct you to have some sort of all-you-can-eat agreement that you enter time against. Technical services, what we once would have referred to as break-fix, has started to come off a little bit in our space. It's not so much popular, but that was a bigger deal. A lot of MSPs that started in the 90s, early 2000s started as technical services businesses. A lot of new MSPs that are just getting their feet wet often have a pretty significant technical services business component. It is an easier way to sell initially to clients that we might not be comfortable selling to, because simply I render service, you pay, like a plumber or construction or any other type of trade. And then lastly, we have professional services, which is typically going to be your scoped labor, your projects. Projects can be incredibly profitable. There are some MSPs I know, they may be here, that have grown immensely big, only doing project revenue with no recurring revenue whatsoever. For the average MSP that's watching this, that's likely going to be stuff you're doing in your project module, maybe a new server getting turned on, firewall deployment, so on and so forth. So it's important before we get into how to enter time that your PSA is aligned for solid time entry. What I find typically happens in the average MSP is someone at some point bought your PSA. That's your ConnectWise, Halo, Autotask, etc. Someone bought your PSA because you need one, and it was set up for where the business was when it was purchased, which typically was more in that time and materials break-fix standpoint. And it's unlikely, as the PSA has evolved over time and as the company has evolved over time, even if you've switched PSAs, it's unlikely you've gone in and restructured the layout of your ticketing system to reflect the way that you conduct business and collect revenue. And that really is the most critical first step you need to do to even have a shot at anything else we're going to talk about. If you were to contract with any of the big name PSA consulting firms in our space, pretty much all of them would give you some form of this story. This advice here is aligned around ConnectWise Manage, but the core concepts apply to really any ticketing system. You need a way to differentiate in your ticketing system, something we call in ConnectWise speak a business unit, and that really needs to be aligned with the profit center and the corresponding cost. So your all-you-can-eat managed service agreement should not be absorbing or eating professional services work. And so it's typical that your business units will reflect income accounts in your chart of accounts, and nearly every income account that you're going to reflect in your ticketing system should have a corresponding hard COGS or direct labor COGS, because if you're entering tickets about it, there's a cost to you for basically for selling it. And in ConnectWise speak, but really just in sort of a general concept, you want to really try to have one business unit per area board in ConnectWise world where you're entering work. You can certainly mix business units, but I've yet to meet an MSP at any size that was both financially mature enough and operationally mature enough to manage that. Usually what ends up happening is some sort of chart of accounts BS where we're throwing in our 365 resale in with our labor and just saying, it's too hard to figure it out. So this is why it's advantageous to separate these things out on the PSA side, even if that means you need to restructure your entire PSA. After our second acquisition, when we became roughly a 60-person MSP with about 12 million, I wanted to go in and redo that project. That project took probably about 6 months. So it's not a small amount of work to do, but it's an important bit of work to do. And ultimately, if you want some additional guidance on these concepts, service leadership, which I highly suggest everybody, regardless of your PSA, enroll in, because they have really, really good chart of accounts metrics. They have some resources, that link I put there, that kind of explain what a sample chart of accounts should look like. I would work back. I would say, here's my chart of accounts, and here's how I'm going to build my PSA to reflect my chart of accounts. So that brings us to another thing that we want to kind of clear up at this point. So you've subscribed to this idea that you're going to restructure your PSA. You understand that we're a for-profit business and that we need to record how we're making money accurately. And you agree with me. A lot of things that you'll hear, especially from that older guard of MSP ownership, those people who started their MSPs in the 90s and early 2000s, is this concept of utilization. And I find, especially on Reddit, this is most commonly where you'll see employees getting really mad they have to enter time because they've been given this arbitrary metric of utilization that the owners don't even really understand. And so I kind of call it the utilization myth, because I think over time we've taken a really solid concept and evolved it into this nebulous monster that no one really understands anymore. So hopefully I can clear that up right now. So there's this concept of utilized versus billable, and I want to kind of update our definitions for that for 2023. I prefer using the term billable, and I have a reason for that. So if you have a standard MSP employee, they're likely in your building or remotely in your building for 9 hours a day. They have an hour of lunch and 8 hours of utilized time. If you were to shoot for a traditional 76% best-in-class billability rate, that's about 6 hours a day of billable time. That's pretty good. It sounds like you're throwing away 2 hours, but you're not, and we'll get to that in a minute. Previously, you would have heard, and there's a link at the end here, it's actually on Avic's site, that the really smart folks over at Taylor Business Group wrote up about calculating utilization. And it's a really, really good article about how to calculate utilization, but it takes that old school mentality that utilized time is only the time that we're billing for. And I would argue that that's a misnomer and what makes it confusing. Everything your staff does while they're on your payroll should be useful to your business. It should be utilized. Training is useful. Hanging out with people for 15 minutes in the conference room, that builds culture. That is useful. Getting on a project scoping call, that is useful. Helping the sales or the account management department figure out a quote, but there's no ticket to track it. So the time doesn't get tracked on a ticket, but you still did it. That is useful. All of that should be utilized. Your goal as an owner or manager should be that your employees, when they enter that door, physically or virtually, are 100% utilized. There should be no question at all that they're not 100% utilized. Once we accept that they're 100% utilized and all my staff are trustworthy and good and doing a good job for my company, then I can focus on the percentage of their work that I'm billing for. And if you make that distinction, it's much easier for your employees to understand. Somebody put in the chat here that we're not punishing them for going to the bathroom. People need to go to the bathroom. That's useful to me. I don't want them going to the bathroom in their chair. I don't want that. That is not useful to me. So switching to that idea of utilization versus billable is a really, it sounds semantic, but it's a really helpful distinction to get your language aligned with how your staff feel like they should be treated. And if you do really want to see a super blown out explanation of how to calculate utilization, it is pretty cool. Totally check out that link. So then that brings us to, we're going somewhere with all. So we've agreed that they need to be utilized. We've agreed that 76% utilization is pretty reasonable. That's about billable. It's about 6.08 hours a day of billable time. That leaves us about 2 hours a day that is not billable. That could be those meetings, trainings, professional development, screwing around, nerf battles, whatever else, all things that help support my company. So why do I need to know that information? Why am I collecting that? So I just added this about 30 minutes ago because I thought it would be helpful to clarify this for people who don't understand this concept. So generally speaking, if you take an employee's base salary loaded is all those other costs to having them as an employee. Their benefits, because you're probably an amazing MSP that has awesome benefits. So all of those additional costs. And if you don't know, if you're a service manager, supervisor, or team lead, and you have no idea what that is, generally speaking, unless you live in a crazy state like Massachusetts or California, probably somewhere between 1.2 to 1.3.5 is a reasonable guesstimate. So you take their loaded W-2 wages, you multiply that by 3, and that resulting total is, generally speaking, the amount they need to produce in billable revenue for you to be reasonably certain they're actually generating a profit for you. And I'm going to show you a graphic in a minute that kind of explains how you can use this as a service manager, as a service management professional, to direct the profitability of your various business units. So a quick example here. Let's say I pay Philip Fry $65K base at a 1.2 loaded rate because I'm not in a crazy state. That's about total W-2 cost to me of $78K a year. Dean is dyslexic with math, and I meant to put 78K times 3, but I put 87K, so pretend I did the other way. That's about $220-something thousand a year that they would need to generate. So Fry needs to be recording at least $234,000 a year to be churning a profit. Could be making more, could be making less. But wait, there's a chart for this that I stole. I intentionally blurred some of this chart out because I absolutely shamelessly stole this from Pax8 Academy without their permission. So go and give them money if you want to see this unblurred. They're amazing. The C-level team is fantastic. I learned a lot of what I know from them. So on this chart, if you look at this really quick, you'll see there's this inner green banding I circled. That inner green banding is your profitability sweet spot. And as you go across, it's pretty much all people who are going to be roughly around that 70 to like 78% billability factor. So remember, that's only about 6.5 hours a day of billable time out of a 9-hour day or an 8-hour day you're paying them for. A billable time, that's a pretty reasonable ask. That leaves about 2 hours a day for somebody to be doing other stuff and still be churning a really, really healthy profit. The axes on this graph, just so everybody knows, you have your hourly billing rate, which you would calculate from their effective rate because they enter time, and you know what you charge for their time in your PSA because you set that up earlier in the slide deck, versus their loaded salary. So as an example here I had in the middle, if you had somebody that you were paying $85K a year, they were only 70% billable, which that's 6 hours a day billable. And you only have to bill them out at $175 an hour for you to be making a healthy profit on them. And anything over that they generate, let's say they work longer than a 6-hour day because they're amazing, is extra profit. In that red zone, you can see we have a burnout red zone on this side, and then we have on the other side, we have sort of a we're not making any money on them red zone. You can't track any of this unless they are accurately entering time. You don't have this available to you. And what this chart allows you to do as a service management professional is it allows you to tactically select who is going to work on what. You likely have a dispatch process by which you're somehow triaging your tickets and using a queue or automation or a person to assign them. If you're a good MSP, you're likely doing that based on some sort of skills and like time, you know, how long the ticket's going to take and the urgency. But if you're a great MSP, you add in that final piece by who will be the most profitable resource to work on this task for me. And that's that final level of maturity that prevents you from having T3s fixing printers and doing password resets and knowing that in real time as the service manager, you're making that choice rather than reactively finding that out at the end of the quarter when you're like, you know, I probably shouldn't have had Brandon from eTop doing all my password resets because he's a senior level Roost consultant. That was a waste of my time. I know that now. Well, yeah, that's great. Now you know it after the fact, but I want to know that in real time so I can make that decision in real time. So there's a couple other things you want to consider doing in your PSA to really align yourself for that time entry to be in real time. So we've sort of agreed to the fact that we need to enter the time. We've agreed to roughly what the metrics look like. How do we get that going in real time? The easiest methodology I can suggest that you all implement is implement SLAs or SLOs. If you don't want to make this client facing, which is an SLA, make it a service level objective. It's an SLO. It's just for you. Your SLOs typically in most PSAs follow a general ITIL format. This is actually from my time entry cheat sheet I used to use on my MSP. I had it laminated 2 sides. Anybody who wants it, email me after this and I'll send it to you. But if you set up your statuses in your PSA to logically work through the order of events in which time needs to be entered, and you start teaching your staff to enter time in that format, your time will now be entered accurately in real time. So just to give everybody an idea of what your typical SLA triggers are and your typical ITIL compliant PSA, you're going to have something that's going to go, we have not responded to we have responded. That's going to click a stopwatch. You're going to have a we have responded to we have created a plan. That's going to click another stopwatch. You have we have created a plan to potentially we are waiting. That'll pause the stopwatch. And then that final click will be when you will resolve the issue. I put the statuses that we used to use at my MSP, new, pre-process, working issue now, waiting on client, completed. The only period in this flow at my MSP in which you could enter time was working issue now. You're actually prohibited. The system wouldn't let you enter time if you didn't have the ticket actively in progress, because that's the only SLA step in which we enter time. And so it was a very easy methodology to train. In fact, one of my old employees in the chat right now, Raina, it was very easy to train my staff when to enter their time by simply just aligning our ticket statuses with the SLA flow and then locking down their ability to actually update the fields. On the other side of this card, it's also important to define what your priorities are going to be. This isn't necessarily important for time entry, but it is a component of SLAs and SLOs. So I would only be telling you half the story if I didn't mention it. The best practice method, there are multiple ways to do this. The best practice method that you'll likely hear from any PSA consultant is to define your SLAs or SLOs by priority. I went full ITIL ITSM when I did it. Very simple, P1, 2, 3, 4. So it's an emergency, critical, normal, or basically we don't care. Our response goals were the same for all of them, 15 minutes to respond to every single one of those tickets for it to be triaged. But then otherwise we had different goals that you can see on this card. The point of this is not really to go over all these goals, but to point out we simplified this methodology where it fit double-sided on a 5x8 index card. That needs to be what you're going to need to do at your MSP if you want your staff to be entering time. This cannot be complex. They cannot be having to page through or remember 15 different flow charts. It needs to fit on a double-sided piece of paper, basically, that you can laminate and hand out to them. And I absolutely would laminate and hand these out to the team. Well, yeah, that's a good point. P4, completely waste of time. Why did you submit a ticket for this? There are things so everything needs to have a priority. So think about that logically. What if I have a scheduled visit at the end of the month to perform routine maintenance? Perhaps your MSP sells bespoke RAID drive complementing, where you go out on site and you find the hot spare, their platter hot spare in the server, and you whisper positive words to it, and that's part of your service offering. That's a P4. It's not an emergency. It's pre-scheduled to happen in the same monthly cycle. So you do need that P4. So what does good time entry look like? So as I kind of already said, an MSP may have staff working an 8-hour shift with a 1-hour break. A good timesheet will actively reflect all 5 of those 9-hour days, and that's important. I am not paying them for 9 hours, but I am using them for 9 hours. I need to be able to have all 9 hours reflected in my timesheet, full stop, or you don't get to work for me. And that's really important. It is a condition of employment. We'll get to that in a second. Some additional things to think about here, admin time and why no one should use it. Many of you, if you were set up in ConnectWise land, but other PSAs as well, you would have had admin time configured for you by their configuration team as sort of a catch-all charge code. We don't want to use that. You want to go in and make specific charge codes and time codes for every type of work that your staff is doing. You really don't want to have any sort of bucket that you're just dumping completely unrealized, unrecorded time into, except you do. And I went with the C-level methodology of what we call payroll wrap. I'll show you on the next slide why. But the idea is there will always be some of this probably, but it should be under a certain limit. And you're going to set a limit for your staff on how much unrecorded time you don't care about. In my MSP, that was less than an hour. If you had less than an hour in a day, fair enough. As long as it's been recorded that there was payroll wrap, I'm not going to ask you what you did. You're fully utilized. I trust you. Everything you're doing at work is useful to me. I understand that you didn't record every minute of your day. It's okay. At your MSP, that might be 30 minutes. Maybe it's 2 hours. whatever it is, but you do want to define that. That's not a completely open-ended bottomless well that they could just dump unrealized time into. It's not something that it's mostly engineers, that your engineers can go at the end of the week and try to retroactively enter all their time into and put it as payroll rep. That's bullshit. And if you're doing that at your MSP, you're a bad employee. So what does good time entry look like? So this is a screenshot from my old MSP. This is an amazing employee that TechRage, if any of you know TechRage stole from me. They stole my precious. They stole from me. But looking at this timesheet really quickly, it's important to see at the end of every single day, I have an even 9-hour total reporting to me that this salaried employee was in the building for 45 hours that week. So on some days, in the middle here, you can see they had payroll rep. There was times they didn't record another tickets, and it went here. And on Thursday here, it was almost an hour of payroll rep. That's okay. They're fully utilized. There's nothing this employee ever did for me that wasn't useful to the business. I'm not worried about their utilization. I'm worried about their billability. And in this case, you can see this person was 85% billable, which would start to make me want to know, are they burning out? Are they tired? Are they stressed? Do they need more help? That's a little bit high billability. But I also noticed that because each of these days isn't even 9 hours and there is payroll rep, that tells me they didn't work any overtime. So I'm not too worried about it. And Justin, hey, Justin, if you're watching right now, I'm not worried that you're burned out. You don't work for me anymore. But this gives everybody an idea. You can see Justin's lunch is on here every day when he took his lunch. All the morning meetings that he did have a time code and a charge code. They're recorded on here. All the meeting, that's useful time to me. There's a specific way to enter time for that. Every ticket that he worked on is recorded. So it's just it's important for everybody to understand that you want to give them an accurate way to record all that time. So how do you make this an actual culture in your company? So if you're sitting there, maybe like Alden, who I saw in there earlier, I already do all the stuff you listed. I already know all the stuff you listed, and my engineer and my tech still don't enter time, or they enter it inaccurately. There's probably some people here that are thinking that or have said that. To be explicitly clear, that's a management issue. And I'm not trying to blame anybody, but this is absolutely your fault. If you are a manager or a supervisor and you are watching this, that means you did this. Are employees allowed to show up whenever they want, wearing whatever they want, smelling however they want? Or do we sort of expect that they need to show up on time, clothed with good hygiene, right? Like showing up wearing clothing is a condition of employment. Why is time entry any different? Saw Dave Son in the chat earlier. We had a whole talk about this. It's important to establish and be clear on what a condition of employment is versus a KPI target. Time entry is a condition of employment. You don't get to not do it. You may make KPI metrics around aspects of time entry, but opting in or out of it is a condition to employment. And that does need to be part of your culture. It doesn't take long for your entire team, in much the same way that the rest of your team would enforce like a tech showing up, totally unhygienic. Your team would solve that for you. They would send the person home on their own. They will do the same thing with time entry if you make this a condition of employment. So I've probably made you feel bad about yourself. How can you fix it? Show of hands, not literally, but figuratively, who attending this session, attending RejectionCon right now, who has a ticket open right now for RejectionCon in progress, displayed on something public so the entire team can see they're entering time for the event? You're mostly executives and owners. If you're not doing it, why should they? Gotta think about that for a minute. You need to lead from the front. And that gets into a quick conversation about leadership versus management. So leading from the front is going to drive that culture forward. You need to display the behavior that you want your staff to display, or they're not going to do it. And this goes with everything, not just boring stuff like time entry, any sort of element that you're trying to make a cultural cornerstone of your company. You need to display the behavior more frequently and better than anyone else all the time. And if you do trip up and fail to do it, you need to be publicly and instantaneously accountable for it. Your leadership is going to influence and guide other members of the organization. Managing expectations and policy compliance is going to cement a foundation. So you put an accountability loop around the process that you then manage them to. Hey, Justin, I see that this week you had 2 hours of payroll rep. What happened? That's not acceptable. That's management. you need to do both. And to quote C-level ops, you need to inspect what you expect. What's important here to understand is that Peter principle. So a lot of people are good at one, but they're probably not good at both. And this is endemic in the tech space. We tend to promote our best techs to be our managers because they've been with us the longest, they're the most loyal, and they understand our clients the most. So they end up being our safety blanket, our wubby. We know they can put out a fire for us, so we tend to put them in positions of authority. That does not mean that they are qualified to be in a position of authority. And as owners and as executives, we need to understand that fact that I can have somebody who is an amazing employee who is not capable of being a manager, and that is okay. And it doesn't mean that everybody's upward trajectory has to be management. Ray's in the chat, he's a big proponent of pushing this culture at OIT, that OIT will build everyone's career, but not everyone's career means they're going to become a manager. And that doesn't mean you're a bad employee. Really important to understand that. It's okay. We're still a young industry. We're only in third generation ownership. If you think about it, like if anyone here feels bad, think about like ConnectWise. Arnie Bellini started ConnectWise and sold it. And that's it. It's not like his son took it over from him and then his son and then his son, or it got sold 5 times. That's only one generation from initial founder at one of the biggest companies in our space. So just remember that like in our industry, we're still a young industry. We don't. So I think I already hammered home this idea about leading from the front. But just to kind of anybody that could be perceived to be involved in day-to-day operations, you need to show the rest of the organization what good looks like. So if that's you, you need to do it. If you think you don't have time, you don't have desire, and it's too hard, your team's thinking the same thing. And they're not going to do something you're not willing to do. You need to be willing to show them that you'll dig the hole, you'll get the mud in your hands, you'll do the work. Just a quick note on gamification. I'm a huge fan of gamification. If any of you want to gamify any of these concepts, go right ahead. I'm happy to talk with you at some other point about it. But just make sure that when you gamify, publish your core values, tie them to the tech's daily life, live what your core values are. Make sure any gamification is fair, open, and equitable. Everybody who's going to be involved in the gamification needs to have an equal chance of being successful in the gamification. In larger firms, it may just be a department. In smaller companies, this is the whole company. So just think about that. Don't leave your admin staff or your bookkeeper or your dispatcher or your intern out of the ability to participate. And reward specific behaviors, not just goals. So if the goal is to enter all time on time, that's a goal. Specific behaviors, timesheet submitted by 9 a.m. on Monday. Reward that. Reward the behaviors. Make it fun, not a contest. We don't want to start people fighting over their paychecks or bonuses. It should be entertaining and fun. I'm a big fan of non-monetary gamification. And as I said, time entry, condition of employment, not a bonus metric. A couple of resources for you guys to make this easier. Adopt an ITIL TSM framework to your company. Make sure your PSA is set up. There are a ton of outside consulting firms that will do this for you. They're amazing. Consider joining Service Leadership, or if you're a Pika fan, True Peer, True Profit. Join a peer group. There's so many in our space. Half of them are free. Even like Chris Weiser's MSP Facebook group, that's a peer group. Join it. It's free. I know some of us dunk on him, but there's some good stuff in there. And adopt tools to make this easier. Nylear, if you use ConnectWise, Nylear will help you automate everything I just went over. MSP bots will help you automate everything I just went over for multiple PSAs. Give one of the two of them all your money. Q&A. So I thought it was important to point out here, if there are no questions, I absolutely can go on a 5-minute tangent about how Avik's core product supports everything I just talked about. Lily over here likes Avik questions and COGS, and she thinks adjusted EBITDA is bullshit. So if any of you are reporting on that, you're lying. I lost audio. I don't know if it's I lost John or my headphones. Oh, good. It's not just me. All right. Well, while we wait for John to figure out his audio, let's see. We did have.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I removed. Yeah, the host muted me. I was going to say from my side, it's an extra mute beyond the mute button that's actually visually there. So thank you, Crowdcast, for that visual indicator. So we have a couple minutes left. We got to end on time. No particular questions from the audience that I found, but I want to ask one question. Out of everything you just talked about, what is going to be the hardest thing for them to take back and execute on, and why is it still critical to go do?
That's a hard one. So there is a Q&A section where there are a few questions.
Sorry. Go ahead.
But it's two-part answer on that, though. Restructuring your ticketing system to match your chart of accounts is not mentally hard. It's a lot of work, though, because you're going to need to undo or change a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of sunk cost fallacy that you need to get over. So that's just operationally a challenge. I think the bigger, harder one is all the managers and leaders here that aren't currently embodying this behavior. That's probably the hardest thing to swallow, is I need to behave the way my lowest level employee is expected to behave. And that's the objection I hear most often when I go through the same speech with business owners. They're like, well, I'm not doing that. I own the business. To which I'm like, that's totally your prerogative. It's your company. Do whatever you want. But they're not going to do it either. Because if you can't be bothered to do it, if it's not important to you, it sure as crap isn't important to them. No one loves your baby as much as you. Yeah. So.
All right. Alex told me we have to stay on time. So we got 10 seconds here, 10, 30 seconds. If you want the service manager watching the P&L, what would you call the highest escalation point?
Highest escalation point, technical team lead. Should be your best people at leading, not necessarily your best at executing solutions. So that's your person who's always jumping in. They get an escalation and they're taking those couple extra minutes, probably not recorded on a ticket. That's a payroll rep, a meeting with that person who escalated and saying, hey, I see why you felt that you needed my assistance to troubleshoot that printer, but let me teach you how to do it. That's your person that really should be your highest escalation point.
I like it. I'm going to push Alex. He's going to get mad at me. I got 30 more seconds. We're going to rapid fire. Do you use the 4 quadrants of time management matrix in help desk tickets?
I don't, but anything with 4 quadrants where you get a piece of paper and you write stuff on it as a visual aid is a really, really helpful tool, especially if you're implementing a process like this. So good for you if you're using it.
Awesome. All right, Alex, I kept us 1 minute over. Sorry about that. Dean, what an amazing talk track. I appreciate everybody dealing with me as I figured out mute buttons too. Well done. And so I think we'll see everybody out on the next schedule. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.